think Transformers One is a movie just for kids? If so, you're missing out on major themes that go way beyond robots and cartoons.
Transformers One isn't just about the origins of the Autobots and Decepticons. It's a raw look at how power, oppression, and government control divide people, both on Cybertron and in real life.
Megatron wasn't just fighting Optimus Prime. He was fighting a corrupt system that kept the working class in chains.
This film challenges us to rethink good and evil when battling a corrupt system. Do all rebels fight for justice, or does the line between hero and villain blur?
I'm Heit.
And I'm Cheri.
And you've discovered Axiom Amnesia.
We want to thank all of the supporters who helped to make this video possible. If you want your name to appear alongside these contributors, make a one-time donation of $5 or more via our website at axiom.app, Cash App, or you can head on over to patreon.com/axiomamnesia to enjoy all of the benefits of becoming a monthly subscriber. The executive producer of this video is Randy L. Johnson, who requested this film through Axiom Amnesia's Deep Dive On Demand program that we'll tell you more about later.
And just so you know, there will be spoilers, and we may have already spoiled it.
Well, okay, so let's talk about the cast first. Of course, this is an animated film, and so we're talking about the actors who voiced these characters, right? So we have Brian Tyree Henry as Megatron, and Chris Hemsworth as Optimus Prime, Vanessa LaCourie as Arachnid, Scarlett Johansson as Elita 1, John Hamm as Sentinel Prime, Steve Buscemi as Starscream, Lawrence Fishburne plays Alpha Trion, John Bailey plays Soundwave, and Keegan-Michael Key is Bumblebee.
Yeah. I always wonder why in these animated films, they use popular film actors. You know, as if like they're just the best at, I don't know, voice acting.
And I kind of wonder because also maybe just the recognizable voice.
I don't even be knowing these people unless it's somebody like, when I'm watching, I'm like, oh, that's Morpheus. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he definitely has a distinct voice.
But when it's somebody like Brian Tyree Henry, then I'm just like...
You wouldn't have known that was him, probably, recognizing his
so
voice.
Why are y'all using these people? Just to pay them a lot? Or that they can go on a circuit and promote the film?
Probably that. And then also, just the big name tied to it seems to matter. And presumably if they can act... with their bodies and everything else, maybe there can be a good voice actor. But I want to say, I spend a lot of time listening to great voice actors who are narrating Audible books. And some of these people are so amazing, like they could do any kind of voice or whatever. And, voices of the opposite gender and all of that stuff, right? And I just can't, but they never seem to get these kinds of roles. And I feel like back in the day in animations, you had people who were not famous voicing these characters, but somewhere along the way it changed.
How do they decide what the voice is going to be, right? So if I'm a black voice actor, do I envision the character sounding white? Because that's what I hear when I hear Brian Tyree Henry. I'm like, oh, okay, I just the typical chippy white voice.
Maybe. Or maybe it's supposed to be like you can't, it's, since they're robots, maybe you're not supposed to feel like you can feel the race of the person.
Would be the white, right? That's why you would do that.
Yeah.
Which is a thing. It's like, oh yeah, the black scent is gone in these times if it's the future or wherever it is or whatever universe this is.
Well, let's think about also like James Earl Jones's voice as Darth Vader in the original Star Wars trilogy, right? It's just James Earl Jones. I mean, obviously he's a black actor, but that deep resonating voice just, it worked there. But I don't know that I associated it with necessarily race because I mean,
all right. And then you also have the animation and stuff of gender.
Yes, we talked about that.
Robots have to have a gender and they...
In a shape, right? The girl ones seem to have little boobs and they're, they're a little bit smaller than the guy ones.
Yeah.
So it still kind of follows sort of a biological, for humans, right? A human biology sort of way. Yeah. Yeah. So let's just talk quickly about a summary of what happens in the film, because there are so many themes that are bigger than this film. And I have to admit, going into this, I was like, Transformers One. Okay, now I didn't even know it was an animation because I hadn't seen this film. And I just assumed, it's going to be like the film that came out, with Shia LaBeouf and them.
Yeah, where they driving around in the city or something.
That's what I was expecting. So when I first saw it was animation, I was like, oh boy, am I going to like this or not?
So you never watched the cartoon?
No, I did not watch the cartoon growing up.
So like growing up, I got cousins and a brother and stuff, and I think they were into that sort of stuff. And maybe there was a Megatron game, I think, at one point, but I don't even remember. But like the G.I. Joes and all that was going on, and the Thundercats and stuff, and I just wasn't
I was into
that.
Thundercats, right? I liked Thundercats. I watched that every day when I came home from school, but I did not watch the Transformers.
Yeah.
But I knew a lot of it, but I knew people who did. So it was like I was very aware of it. I just wasn't into the whole story because I didn't watch it.
I knew nothing about this, right?
Yes.
Nothing. So if you bring up like the G.I. Joe, all that stuff from that time, the cartoon, I just know nothing about any of them. Want us to cover your favorite movie ASAP? A one-time contribution of just $50 or more to Axiom Amnesia gets you a deep dive on demand, a 30-minute discussion on any film you choose.
It's easy. Step 1, send $50 via our website, axiom.app, where you can pay via card, Apple Pay, or you can pay directly via Cash App at $Axiom Amnesia. See the links below. Step 2, tell us your movie, email, the name you want to appear on screen, and what kind of deep dive you want. General, a specific character, a particular aspect of the film, etc. Step 3, watch your deep dive on demand with your name listed as executive producer.
Lock in your deep dive on demand today and hurry. Spots are limited.
This offer is not valid for filmmakers or distributors. Subject to availability and terms apply. So where were you watching?
I don't know.
The Smurfs?
I watched the Smurfs. I know about Papa Smurf and I don't even know their names. I don't know what I was doing. I was probably playing around outside
playing
somewhere.
outside and not watching the cartoons.
Part of it too, you got to have cable all the time because some of this was on like USA and stuff, and on like Saturday morning cartoons. I don't want to sit around and watch no cartoons.
I used to really, really want to watch cartoons Saturday mornings. And for a good swath of my childhood, I was not able to because that was when we went to our dance class, tap, ballet, and gymnastics. So it was like pretty much your Saturday was blown until the afternoon. And as part of this, we would never be able to watch Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah, but maybe I didn't. So they had those shows on like ABC, NBC that were like actual people, like that little sports show. I think old boy I forgot his name, who was on ESPN. Y'all know him, Scott, whatever. I'm sorry, I'm not a sports guy either. And like the one with the guy from Boys in the Hood. What's his name? And Baby Boy, his brother. Gooding, Omar Gooding, and stuff like that. It was just those types of shows is what I watched in California Dreams. And so I was watching like maybe just those types of sitcoms and stuff. What's the one with Zach Morris? Saved by the Bell? Stuff like that. I don't think I was really into the cartoons.
Yeah. So
and yeah,
I much the same, but Transformers was not on my radar in this way. I just generally knew the kind of names of some of the players, and I had seen the actual film that was real people in it, Shia LaBeouf and them.
I didn't see it.
I saw that from back in the day because it was big, and I pretty much saw all the blockbusters during that period. So but let's talk about what happens in the movie so we can get to the themes, because the themes is what had me like, okay. So Transformers One is this 2024 animated science fiction film, and it delves into the origins of this iconic rivalry between Optimus Prime and Megatron, and is set against the backdrop of their home planet, Cybertron, right? And so, as we always talk about these different acts in the movie, Act 1 kind of sets everything up. Act 2 presents a possible problem and, we got to solve it. And then Act 3 is where it gets resolved, and the film ends. So in Act 1, we have kind of like this brotherhood in the mines, right? And so the story starts with Orion Pax, who is voiced by Chris Hemsworth, and we talked about that in D16. So Orion Pax is he'll eventually become Optimus Prime, and D16 will eventually become Megatron, right? But this is them before they actually become that. So both of them work as miners on Cybertron, and they're extracting energon to power their city, Iacon, right? And so their camaraderie is evident, and they navigate the perils of mining and whatever, with Orion's idealism leading them into all of these sorts of troublesome situations where then you have D16 Megatron frequently rescuing his friend. And so despite their shared hardships, though, and I'm just going to call him Optimus Prime so we don't get confused as we go along. Optimus Prime, he dreams of a better future, while Megatron becomes increasingly disillusioned with the ruling class's neglect of the working class, right? Because they got these, bots that are down there mining, and, they're almost like enslaved. And so then we have Act 2, and it's like these diverging paths. So as Cybertron faces their energon crisis, the planet's leadership, who is including Sentinel Prime, is struggling to maintain order because people are starting to get, unrest begins to happen when there's not enough energy and people are unhappy and stuff. And you got to keep the masses happy before they start uprising. So then Optimus Prime, he embarks on a quest to locate the Matrix of Leadership, which is this powerful artifact that's believed to restore energon's flow to unify their planet, right? Cybertron. And so meanwhile, you also have Megatron, who's frustrated by the systemic oppression, and he begins to rally the other miners and citizens, and he's advocating for a more aggressive approach to the reform. And so they have this ideological rift that strains their friendship, with Optimus Prime seeking like peaceful solutions and Megatron being like, we're gonna have to just get busy, and he resorts to more militant action, right? And so then Act 3, we'll call it Rise of the Different Factions, right? So the climax unfolds as Megatron has now, really become Megatron, and it leads to this uprising against the established order, and they form the Decepticons. And then you have Optimus Prime. He's proven his worthiness, so he gets the Matrix of Leadership, and then he's transformed into actually Optimus Prime, and he's taking command of the Autobots. And so there's this ensuing battle that winds up happening in the future stuff, because this is really like the prequel to how they became Optimus Prime and Megatron, this movie is. And so they have this battle between the Autobots and the Decepticons that, later on in time, and so it's ultimately winds up being kind of like this civil war. But at the end of the film, we have Optimus Prime being kind of the leader there of the Autobots. And then we have Megatron with his Decepticons, and they've been cast out of there. They're like, you can't come back around here anymore. And also Optimus Prime is like, and our actual enemies, if you come back here, we gonna give you that business too, right? And so it ends on this very much like, we're all unified front, the bad guys are out of here and whatever. And so it's this exploration of friendship and ideology and the tragic consequences of when you have these divergent paths of ideology. And so it adds to kind of this franchise's mythology about, the origin stories of their, two of their main characters. And so that's basically what happens. And then to add, just to kind of give a little more context to what happened in the film. So basically the guys who were working in the mine, these robots, they took their ability to transform when they were born. Sentinel Prime did, right? And so he did that, and he was working with the enemies, and he was giving them all of the power. So here you got these bots thinking they're working so hard to save their own planet, but in reality, they're just working to serve this elite class, right? And whatever they want, plus their enemies. And so it's at the point when they discover, who they are, and they get all of their cogs, is what they call that, thing that gives them the ability to transform. Once they get that, then, everybody can be strong and do all of their transforming and all of this stuff. So that's basically what happened in the movie. So what were your impressions of the film? Did you want to watch it initially?
No.
Yeah.
Not that I was like, oh man, come on.
Yeah. It was disappointing at first, but I was very pleasantly surprised and glad that I did.
Well, but I would say that all of these movies, these big blockbusters like this, they all have those similar sort of themes, right? Mm-hmm. The fight between good and evil, and you know what I'm saying? And who is controlling the society or whatever it is, right? And the reasons behind it, and the people, basically good versus evil, right? And the people rising up against these evil overlords and stuff.
Yeah.
So, it's just that I'm not a fan of action.
Right.
And a lot of them, they just like to
Full of
spend a
action.
lot of time just showing me things happening.
Now,
that doesn't really advance the stories.
I would say I'm not a fan of action films in general, but what I found thrilling to watch was the fact that this is an animated film, and to see how they played out all of these, gravity defying, of course they're like in space or whatever, but all of these magnificent shots and angles and different things that you're able to see. And so to me, the action was a lot more gratifying than in a movie where you just have real people in there doing regular, a live action type of situation.
So you like Fast and Furious?
No. So what I'm saying is
the new ones, they're defying.
Oh, okay. Well, I like it when it's just totally off the wall, and and maybe that's the case. But like Fast and the Furious lost me, maybe after the third, fourth movie, because there's just too many of them, and I just no longer was into them. But I was into them in the beginning when they first started coming out.
Yeah.
And so, but the graphics to me were amazing. I remember watching and thinking, oh my gosh, this is not how anything animated that I saw as a child looked, and how thrilling it was, to kind of experience because you look at it and it's not lifelike, but just how good the graphics are, the animations are good.
Right. So I dabble a little bit in some, 3D modeling and stuff. So and I've done some 3D games using specific engines. That's a whole different conversation in itself, right? Someone called it the engification of gaming or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, so then I look at it in that sort of a light, and they're doing some amazing things and making advances in that.
Yeah,
I'm just a technologist.
When I was growing up, it was like, you had what I would call like regular, very flat looking cartoons.
Oh, yeah.
And then you had like claymation, like that was, like Gumby or something like that, or certain movies. That was about
Jobs,
it.
Right?
Yeah, you had Steve Jobs. Mm-hmm.
Right? And then that's kind of when we got Toy Story and those sorts of films and stuff, then,
started revolutionizing what these films could really look like, So, but let's get back to Transformers One. So the basic idea is that you have these two friends who are trying to fight this corrupt system together, but they fell out over their philosophies, right? And so once the current system was destroyed, one friend was like, hey, I want to go back to the original system, because ultimately Optimus Prime believed in the system. Whereas you have Megatron, who was like, I don't want anybody to be over me anymore like this. I don't want a king, right? That's really what Megatron was saying. Now, he also was like, let me be in charge.
B-16.
But,
right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he did not want that. And so that was the falling out. And so let's talk about, like, what if everything that we thought we knew about good and evil in Transformers was a lie, because...
Yeah, so that's one of the ways that it falls short, right? Because how easily everyone gets on board once somebody just comes out and tell them, hey, everything you were told was a lie. This whole system is upside down. Mm-hmm. Like if we compare it to real life, if you go out there and you like people did in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and like, hey, y'all, the U.S. government is this, and this, it purports to be this, but look at these exact situations and events, and people are like, no.
They're very skeptical, but see, here's the important thing, I think, is that people have to be looking for solutions. See, when people are pacified and they're satisfied, they're not going to really even be open to anything new. They're just going to uphold the status quo. But when these people were working in the mines, the people were getting they were getting restless. They were like, look, I'm getting to the, egg prices is high. You know what I'm saying? That was kind of the equivalent. And so when people are there and they're looking for a leader, they are, just primed to be led and taken advantage of, and they're more willing to listen because they're uncomfortable. Yes, that's true. That's true. So then the question is, was Megatron truly the villain, and was his rebellion justified, or does Optimus Prime represent justice? Like, what do you think? Because the more I look at it, I feel like I don't know. Is Megatron a villain? Because he didn't want a leader.
Right, but the movie don't position him as the villain, do they?
I think, well, I guess if once you realize that at the end he's tossed out, he's considered bad when they have their final fight between Optimus Prime. He's bad then. He's bad because he says, I'm not going to save you anymore. And then he lets Optimus Prime, Optimus Prime go, and he's basically falling to his death off of that building.
Right.
He's definitely considered, I think, the bad guy after that point, for sure. And there were inklings of it prior to that, right?
Yeah, it's I guess Wicked.
That's what I was gonna say. It reminds you a lot of Wicked because, of course, before they were enemies, they were friends. It's that, and maybe even
and the
that
good person is labeled as bad, right? So no matter what, it's still flipped every time. It's everything is flipped, right? Oh, you think so and so is in charge? Well, that's not the case, right?
Yes.
You think Sentinel Prime is the good guy? He's really bad. You think Megatron is good? He's bad. You think he's bad? He's good.
Yeah.
But see, I think people who watch the animated series and I think the film series may have some different sense of who is good and bad because of the way that progressed, right?
Well, and the ultimate question to me is, all right, clearly it was right to rebel against Sentinel Prime because Sentinel Prime had enslaved these, robots, and, he was lying to them and they were under a false pretense. Of course, we know he has to go. But the question is, should we have a system that allows a Sentinel Prime to exist in the first place? You got Optimus Prime, who's like, yes, I'm just going to be in charge and it'll be great. And then you have Megatron, who is like, I don't want to be in charge of that. I want to do how I want to do,
But see, that's what happened all the time when there's this oppressive ruling body, right? And then the factions who fight over that. I just watched I didn't finish the whole series, but there's this one documentary, The Weight of Chains, and I think there's 3 of them about Yugoslavia and what happened there. And this guy just paints the picture of how basically all the factions were created to rise up against this created enemy.
Yeah.
And then those people, fight amongst themselves, right? So it's never clear. Well, there can be a situation where it's never clear who is good and who's bad because it just depends, right? So you can't just label one good and one bad or one bad and one good.
And you can't anticipate what a person or leader will do when given the opportunity. Also, a lot of times you can't, because they're going to say what they have to say to get elected or, beforehand. And then, they might switch up on you.
Even here, we're not talking about elections. In this film,
well, that's true. That is true. They are not being elected. Okay, this is and here we go again. This is because ultimately at the end, Optimus Prime is the king. He's been handed this thing that says you earned the right to be the king and you are a just ruler, but you are still a ruler.
Yeah. So all these ideas, these are ancient ideas. I would say are historic ideas because of empires before, right? And those have been glorified. So when it comes into film, like all the ones we're talking about, the big budget films and stuff, it's not about, hey, the people are electing, it's not democratic, and there may be hints of republics. And I haven't watched them all, so y'all probably know better than me. But just from what people tell me about these things and the discussions I see, that's what I get. So it's really about who's leading the empires, right?
Yeah.
What autocrats or little group of small bodies are ruling.
Yes, and that's a good point. And we should talk about that with like the corrupt system of Cybertron, right? And so, they were like a world divided. They had oppressed workers and the ruling elite. And, you had this working class, which Orion Pax and D16, Megatron and Optimus Prime, they were part of that class at that point, and they were suffering under this unfair system. But then you got Sentinel Prime, the High Council and whatever, they live in good, they live in the palace. These other ones, they can't even come where the ruling elite are. Like you stay underground, you don't even get to come up. We just, and you're just being ruled and subjugated. And so
and you don't know the true nature of things.
That part,
and
right?
The history is, hidden from you and everything, and you're given a certain viewpoint.
And that's important in the hidden history, right? Because what happens is at the beginning of the film we see we see Optimus Prime trying to find out what is the history, like what is the deal, but none of it is obvious. Like you can't just go look it up. So he's breaking in, trying to find papers and stuff, on what is the history of what happened in the past. Is what
Orion
they're telling
Pax
us the truth. Orion Pax, yes. I know, I just kind of like, I hate that they turn into different names because I didn't know that name and I just know Optimus Prime.
Yeah,
so, pre-Optimus Prime, maybe I could call him pre.
No, because the other ones already existed, right? Optimus Prime and Megatron already existed.
I don't think so. I think they got new names, right? Okay, some
No,
expert.
they were looking for Optimus Prime in them because of the old matrix of leadership.
I thought they were looking for the primes, but it wasn't Optimus Prime. It was somebody else, some other name.
I think at the very beginning, very beginning of the film, they was telling us about Optimus Prime because he was looking. B-16 was looking at whatever archival footage they had about
Orion Pax was, I think.
Really?
I thought that's the one who, well, anyway, maybe
Either
not.
way, they were looking at this archival footage of the history and it stopped, right? And I think the narrator, who was Optimus Prime, was the one telling the history. But I could be wrong.
Was it time travel? One of y'all experts, because again,
it was like Optimus Prime became the planet.
I'm lost a little bit because I don't know the full history outside of just this movie of what the deal was. And we know you all are experts and you can help us in the comments to clear that up for us. But, so there's that detail. But what I want to focus on too is that in the beginning, I feel like you have D16, who is Megatron, is the one he's playing by the rules, even though he doesn't really believe in the system, which is interesting because then you have Optimus Prime, who's always, or Orion Pax, who's always getting himself into things that then Megatron has to help with or gets pulled into and everything like that.
Yeah.
But yet he believes in the system, which is kind of interesting because you would think the person who believed in the system would want to actually go along with the system, but that's not, he's definitely a rebel.
You have the bad friend who pulls you into stuff like most those TV shows and movies, right?
Orion Pax is the bad friend that pulls you into mess, supposedly for a good reason.
Yeah.
Right. Supposedly for a good reason, and so,
that's where he messed up.
So here's the question. Is the government, right? Once Optimus Prime takes over at the end or whatever, are those Autobots, because and I have to admit, I was like, dang, I feel it, because when they all got together and then they all rolling out and everybody got the ability to transform, I was like, dang, I kind of got swept up a little bit
crying.
No, I didn't cry, but I was just like, yeah, like it makes you feel a little hyped. I can kind of see why people like that, because when you see them rolling out and they doing their wheelies and you know what I'm saying? Everybody's flexing with their cogs now when they, I was like, yeah, I'm feeling that. But the question is, are those Autobots upholding peace, or are they just protecting the status quo that would allow another Sentinel Prime to happen at some point in the future?
So that tells us like, hey, why didn't people resist this more in the past? Because look what you get on the other side. You're not the slaves.
Yeah.
After all this, possibly, right?
And we kicked out the people we think are bad.
Hey, as long as I'm not in that position I was before, I'm all right. I don't care if he's ruling. We had this discussion many years ago on our podcast. Could you be happy under a dictatorship? This was over a decade ago.
Yeah, probably 12 or 13 years ago.
Yeah. And I think my position, I don't even know, but I think my position was that, of course, you could, if the dictator allows you to do things that you want to do.
We agreed that you could be happy under it because of the fact that whatever your proximity is to this dictator, if you got the ear, if you can do what you want to do.
Or if you're a part of the group who he's upholding or she is upholding.
You're going to be real happy. You think about it. In all of these countries where, they have bad governments and everything, there are a lot of people who are happy with the way things are going. The ruling elite are happy 9 times out of 10 in most of these situations,
but not just the ruling elite, the regular people sometimes, right?
Well, yeah.
It's just like, okay, let's say you could vote for every single thing that you want and you got it. You would be happy under that, even if other people are worse off.
Yep.
And that's basically the same thing. If the dictator gave everything or lots of things that you want and you can live how you want, you're going to be all right.
Yeah.
So when you get the miners who were just mining before, and now look at me, I'm jumping around, flying. I ain't got to mine no more.
Yeah, and because they got the shortest end of the stick, right? They get the shortest end of the stick. So the people who have it the worst, I think, are going to be the most likely to rebel in these circumstances because your life is the worst. If you got, a nice job where you don't have as much, duress, then you maybe, you just like, well, it's not great, but it's not terrible. So, I'll just stick with it because that the revolution is gonna require some pounds of flesh and blood, and and it's not gonna be easy. There will be things that need to be sacrificed for for change to come.
Yeah. So why should they oppose Megatron at all?
Well, I don't think they were going to, right? There were people who weren't, right?
Right. So what did he do that was wrong per se?
Well, so here's the thing. I think he showed elements of, I want to be a tyrant ruler, and I'm just going to be just like Sentinel Prime, and ultimately you're going to wind up serving my will, even though he was a hypocrite because he didn't want anybody to be over him, but he was like, let me be your leader.
Yeah, but what was Sentinel Prime doing, right? He sold them out. He had people doing stuff that they didn't have to do, working in servitude.
Yeah, that's true.
What did Megatron do, right? You can have hints of whatever, but what is he going to impose? I'm taking all your cogs back?
Nah, see, he wasn't doing that. So I think both options were better than Sentinel Prime, right? And then you just have the splitting of the factions. You have the people who are like, we about to get busy over here. I'm with Megatron. And then we have the ones over there who are like, I stand on, values of justice and all of that. And you got the Autobots, right? But
there are problems of this, like where you make it seem like utopia when you like the energy flows. Then I'm just like, everything's perfect. They got cogs, they dancing, energy flowing. That's the only issue of the day. There's nothing else to be solved. It's done. You just got to make sure that, I don't know, somebody else don't come in. Maybe. And that's it.
So,
that's a very different life. Like all your needs are met.
And then when you look at, though, this parallel, right, with how governments through history have crushed uprisings in the name of order, because that's really what Sentinel Prime was trying to do. Once they realized, it's getting away, from us, the people are, about to get out of control. They want to crush that uprising. Hey, we have to characterize anybody who's a rebel as being bad or evil, or they don't have your best interest at heart, because the people who want control need to try to maintain that status quo.
So one of the things Sentinel Prime did was he saw, because of what's his name? Orion Pax, right? Mm-hmm. They got into this race against the people who could actually transform, the Transformers, and they showed their great abilities, right? Mm-hmm. And then he basically like, you going down to level 50, a place that nobody knew existed. Well, they didn't know existed, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that same thing too. Oh, this person's showing promise and abilities. Bam, banished.
Got to go. Because you're going to be a problem. Anybody who, and I just think that that's the way leadership looks at it a lot of times. If they don't think they're going to be able to control you or use you in a certain way, you got to go.
When you go on your job and you flexing all your skills and talents and stuff, it might not be working out the way you think it's going to work out.
Especially with your immediate supervisor. Because
if you're not like up there in that C-suite already.
Because we saw that, right? We saw that in the film, because there was the one part where after they win this race or they didn't win, but after they showed up at this race where they weren't even invited and they were racing against the Transformers who could actually transform, then you see Sentinel Prime come and he's like, hey guys, I want you to come. And what does he say? I want you to be the inspiration for the miners, right? Because they raced as miners and miners weren't in the race. And he's like, be their inspiration, right? So you see leadership giving you somebody to aspire to be, but knowing that they're never going to let that person actually have any real power.
Yeah, all you know is he's missing now. You're like, ooh, they done left the hood.
Yes.
And you never see them again, and you think it's because they doing good, and all they doing
Meanwhile,
is not
they're in
contributing
the lower basement where they've been banished to down there with Bumblebee, you know. So, you know, that to me is something that we cannot ignore in the process of this. And just to kind of talk a little bit more about Megatron. So when D16 transforms into Megatron, you know, he was an idealist at first, and he wanted to fight for the workers' rights. And y'all know, we always talk about how much Heit is into labor laws, worker rights, movies that have anything to do with this. 9 times out of 10 he's seen. And I was interested in like what your take on like the whole labor aspect of this was, because it was kind of like, hey, workers unite. They were getting behind him. Yeah. They were excited when the miners looked like they might actually be able to be on the map with the,
I think it's very light, but it's a different world where you don't, well, it's not that different, where you don't have to work per se, right? Mm-hmm. They're not doing it for income or nothing. They're doing it for the sake of their country, which is more of a like communal
socialist
type thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, you know, and I don't know if it's some people who were aspirational, right? And then they did not know this, right, that they were in this position that they were in. But I think many times in labor movement, people know that these are bad situations. Not somebody have to go outside and then come back and tell you, you know, well, I guess it does happen like that with unionization and stuff. But I think it's very light on that, right? It's just, we have the people at the top. It's a 2-tiered at least system, maybe 3. And the bottom are the workers. Right. But it don't show the specific grievances and how they're addressed, like with so many other movies. Right. That's about actual movements.
Except maybe like 9 to 5. So the movie 9 to 5 starring Dolly Parton and Dabney Coleman. And who else was in there? A few other people y'all know, Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin was in there. And this is a movie that came out in the 1980s. And I happen to know this movie really well because I was a kid.
Like Dolly Parton?
No, because I was a kid and it would come on HBO all the time. And it had some scenes in it that were kind of funny and would appeal to kids. But ultimately,
we just watch this?
We did watch it not that long ago. Ultimately, it is a labor movie of sorts, but it's especially about women's labor, right? And about, you know, how women were not treated fairly in the workplace and whatever. And so then these women basically kidnap and tie up the boss, and then they take over the office and they revamp the office in the way that women would like the office to be. You know, they have like daycare at the office and work share, so they don't have to work full time. Like they made real changes, and you actually got to see those changes in that movie.
This is really not about the labor in the sense where you have this tier society and we just have to overturn the whole thing. Right?
Right.
So it kind of just sidesteps the labor issue.
Know someone who's obsessed with movies? Surprise them with the ultimate gift, a personalized 30-minute Axiom Amnesia deep dive on demand on their favorite film. For just $50, they'll get exclusive insights and see their name as executive producer. Get yours today at axiom.app. So back to this whole thing with Megatron. So Megatron was ready to go to war, right? Well, you know, D16, you know, after he got his cog, the first one that he was, you know, given that came from the primes or whatever, when they went and found it, he got a cog, and then he was ready to start fighting from the point he got that cog. He was like, oh yeah, I can get busy now.
He got the wrong cog.
And he got the cog and was going to, you know, was ready to start fighting. And so the question is, what I would call the Autobots, the people who would be on the side of Optimus Prime, you know, they just didn't want to acknowledge that system was broken, though. They were like, we're just going to keep doing this same system. It's just we need a new leader. Versus Megatron, who D16, who is saying like, nah, we're going to have to fight. So if peaceful change is not possible, is the only answer that it's not peaceful change or that you just don't get change? You know, are you going to have to go to war? And, you know, the question is, how is Megatron's ideology mirroring some of real life, you know, revolutionary leaders that we have seen?
Yeah.
Or does it, you know?
I think if you look across the world, you got all sorts of things that happen, right? You got your different coups, you got your peaceful turnovers, right? Like even Russia, right? Mm-hmm. And from the USSR. Right? That wasn't really a bloody conflict, but it changed what type of system they had.
Right.
So those sorts of things. So I think we got examples of many different ways. And if you're even going to try to come up without knowing any history of anything, try to come up with something like this is going to fall into something that's happened because there's not much
that hasn't happened before.
Yeah.
And I just think it depends on how smart, the people who the rebels are, right? The people who are trying to take over, where you're trying to do like a military coup or, whatever, how smart, how planned they are. Because sometimes I just think people come up with a very rudimentary plan. Like we just going to go up in there with these guns and we going, you know what I'm saying? Or you have more sophisticated ways and plans that have played out
on your
over
power and everything too.
Yes, and have played out over long periods of time. So when you look at it, when you get the slow burn, it may be harder to see.
Yeah.
Right? You don't see it coming as much because, you get this incremental change that doesn't feel so crazy, but when you look at what things used to be compared to today, you're like, hold up, So these are all things to think about. But I just, so many parallels with history and with current events.
Yeah.
And so was Optimus Prime, do you think he was just a defender of order, or is he like a pawn of the system? Do you see him as just kind of being the one to, I think back to Colin Powell and what happened after, and he came out yellow cake. Yes.
Yellow cake, weapons of mass destruction.
Yes. So he came out and he was basically like, it was definitely weapons of mass destruction. He came out as the poster boy for that. And he was, clearly used to advance something.
I don't know if he was clearly used.
Well, okay. All right.
So I just think
I felt that he was clearly loose because why would you? Well, either that or he knew he was taking the fall. Right. He knew he was the one to go out and serve up the nonsense.
I think most of the time. So what happened was before we were in times where information wasn't readily available and it wasn't spread as fast. Right. So we had the explosion of social media in those times. Right. And then you had the gates were down. So then you had people making documentaries on their own who weren't a part of the establishment or who weren't, the gates weren't there to keep them out of making things. Right. So then, I just think that these people who are in those positions and they're lifelong devotees to these ideals, then I think they're likely to just be a part of it and think that this is what needs to be done to get the world that we want.
Yeah.
And whatever it takes, they're willing to do.
Yep.
And then when the public sentiment changes, then they try to make it look like they were possibly duped or, rebrand themselves as something else, right? Like, I didn't know about this. And we see this. We see him, we see Michael Steele, we see all these people,
because Michael Steele is on MSNBC now. Like, what in the world?
Yeah.
You on the left? Well, yeah.
You have the other people who are doing the opposite, right? They're like, I see the way the world is going. Let me go ahead and go over there and be like, I'm just being more understanding and open. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really is.
A lot of them, if you make it up to that position, you're playing the game. And you're playing it at a high level. So to just be like, I don't know about this.
What about the regular people? What if you're just a regular everyday person? You're not powerful. You're just,
That's what these movies are for, right? So these three who went out there were just the regular everyday people to make it seem like the regular everyday person can just stumble upon these things and take down a great empire. Right? That's what a lot of these films are about.
It's to give you the hope. Somebody said, put out Transformers One to give the miners hope.
Yeah.
But, I feel that because, and then I always am like, okay, how do I make heads or tails of what I'm seeing? This person over here, that person, and I tend to just go back to just my very basic, and it happens to be, biblical, but it's like know a tree by its fruit. Like, if the fruit is evil, the tree is not good, and it's just as simple as that. But when we get into the gray areas of good and bad. And, you and I talk about this a whole lot because especially when it comes to people, most of the people are not extreme. Like, hey, this person is all good and all evil. You got people operating in the middle, and with the blind spots of being human and things being personal to them and some stuff not personal. You got so many factors.
You could be good for now, good for later. You know what I'm saying? You're good for now because, hey, we got this common enemy, but, blah, 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 right? After the revolution, the revolutionary becomes a conservative or whatever the quote is.
But see, I think it's people's inability to realize how they should ally. We spent an entire generation, and I guess these shows are still on, like Survivor. We spent a generation or more of people who watched Survivor when it very first came out, watched the dynamics of human interactions, watched how people would lie their way to the end, watched how to have alliances and when to switch, when to drop that alliance, when to get a new, you watch all of these dynamics and we still seem like we don't have a clue when we watched it play out on these things.
So when that happens, you can go back and people love the tyrant of those groups. They're one of the favorites. Everybody else no one ever votes off the tyrants. You know what I'm saying? So, or whoever the most cutthroat or backstabbing people. So that's
why is that?
Big clue.
Why do people look like, are they like, hey, else. I know I can't take them out, but let me take out my other threats first, and then we'll have the final, duel with them in the end?
So what I look at it from a U.S. perspective, right? Who in history, who has been celebrated, and then you got your answer.
Well, let us talk also about this blurred line between hero and villain, right? And we sort of mentioned how this idea that good and evil are not necessarily absolute. It wasn't absolute in Transformers. There were, like you said, what did Megatron do that was actually bad in this movie that we saw? And, the film, I don't think the film, some people might look at it and feel like the film avoids this simplistic good versus bad narrative. But I think in the end, it is reinforcing good versus bad because it's clear that Optimus Prime and his crew of Autobots are the ones you should be siding with. They don't say, well, you could go here, you could take the left door or the right door. It doesn't say that. At the end of this, you feel like you should be with the Autobots if you're just going off of your emotion of how it's sold to you, But I was kind of like, just like at the end of Wicked, I was like, I might be with Elphaba here. I might be, I'm with Elphaba, and in this case, are you with Megatron or are you with the Autobots and Optimus Prime? Yeah, you.
I'm not with anybody. They all right.
You the one who is like, I fix both of y'all stuff. I work.
Yeah.
I'm independent.
Yeah. Like.
Yeah. And there were, like, you brought up some things talking about, Yugoslavia and stuff like that. But there are historical and pop culture types of parallels, revolutionaries who then turned into oppressors, because I think that is the implication here, is that Megatron becomes an oppressor. He becomes who he used to fight against. Right. But that also is like a trope or something, yeah. But we look at like the French Revolution, the Bolsheviks, you brought that up earlier, Star Wars, even, in fiction. This is what happened. The leaders who resisted change, then they're later viewed as villains. Now, the question is, are they viewed as villains or were they actually villains? Did they turn to the dark side, so to speak?
Yeah. Sort of like, we even watched Joker, that series.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you think that Megatron and Optimus Prime could have ever been like, we compromise and they could coexist?
Ever? Yeah, sure.
Or even yeah.
Of course, but that's not what happened.
Never what happens. It's never what happens. But I'm glad that we watched this, and I just think that I was not expecting this lesson to be the thing. I guess if I had really considered kind of what the subject matter that a lot of these animated films and stuff talk about, good versus evil.
They just be doing too much though. And then when you see people online, they're like, you got to watch every single one in the history of this thing to watch this. So I just be like, I ain't going through all that to watch this stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and even still, I'm confused because I was like, oh, this isn't part of that series. This is totally separate, but it's like an origin story. So it's a prequel to all the other stuff that I didn't even see or know about. Really.
Well, maybe you're an advantage because you don't come to the table with all of the baggage of whatever decisions the people who originated the story, came up with.
Yeah, but then it's too much because now you're going to come out with something else. And recent changes here on this platform are making it harder for you to see our latest videos and get notifications. To make sure you don't miss out on anything, we're building our own community, both on our website, axiom.app, and on Patreon with free and paid options available.
Here's the deal. While you can still watch our videos on YouTube, much of our current catalog and many of our upcoming videos will become unlisted and only accessible to our Patreon, axiom.app, and YouTube channel members. We'll be posting links to these unlisted videos directly on Patreon and axiom.app, so you'll be the first to see them, if you're a member.
If you choose the free Patreon option, you will still get access to some exclusive content like watch parties where we watch movies together and give the commentary and other special videos. But premium paid members will get full access to all of our exclusive content. No new account is needed to join our Patreon. Just log in with your existing social media account.
While some of you may find this announcement disappointing, don't worry. We have no plans to leave YouTube at this point, but you guys are our cousins and our tribe, and we refuse to let platform changes tear us apart. So help us stay connected. Join us on Patreon today at patreon.com/axiomamnesia. You can check the links down below or in the comments. But all in all, I am glad that I watched it because this is not a movie that I would have chosen to watch. And so I'm glad that I did watch it because, there was definitely some stuff to talk about. So we thank the executive producer, Randy L. Johnson, so much for getting us to watch this film and for allowing us to give our thoughts and presentation on, what we took away from this film. And Randy, show us some grace a little bit and clear up anything that we didn't fully understand because, we don't know the Transformers universe and all the canon from Transformers Land. So, just clear us up. Let us know in the comments, what things that we needed to get straight that we had asked about earlier, but we appreciate you so much.
If you made it this far, type Prime in the comments so we'll know you're one of the real ones who stick around to the end.
And be sure to check out one of the videos that's on the screen right now. And also take yourself to axiom.app, that's axiom.app, where you can find all of our recent videos in one place that'll link you back to YouTube. And also look below this video because we got merch now, y'all.